Some promises are made with the pure heart of a child, meant to last forever. Others fade like dust in the wind, forgotten by everyone except the one who made them. I'd spent 20 years on the Broken Arrow Ranch, convinced I was the second kind of man, the kind who was meant to be forgotten. At 62, my hands were leather and my heart was stone. I'd made my peace with being alone. Or so I told myself every morning, staring out at the same Wyoming sunrise. This was my world. The creak of the porch swing, the smell of strong coffee, the low groan of cattle waking in the fields. It was enough. It had to be enough. In my pocket, I kept a leather journal. 20 years of entries, none more than a line or two. Weather, cattle counts, fences that needed mending, the quiet life of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. The work was honest, and the horses never asked about the ghosts that rode with me. They were good company, better than people. People always wanted to know where you came from, what you were running from. The horses just wanted to know you'd be there in the morning with a bucket of oats. "Morning, Travis." Jeremiah Winters, the owner of this place, walked up with his own steaming mug. He was 78, with eyes that saw more than a man had a right to see. He'd taken me on 2 decades ago, no questions asked. A kindness I'd never been able to repay. "Morning, Jeremiah," I grunted, touching the brim of my hat. We stood there in that comfortable silence that old friends have, where you don't need to fill the air with noise. But lately, the silence had started to feel different. Heavier. Lonelier. It was on mornings like this, when the light hit the yard just so, that the memory would come back. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, with pigtails and eyes the color of a summer sky. She'd stood right there, on that very spot. "I'm gonna marry you when I grow up," she'd said, with all the certainty in the world. Her little hand had slipped into mine, and it felt like a brand. "You're the nicest man in the whole world. I'm gonna be your wife." I'd chuckled, of course, told her by the time she was grown, I'd be too old and too worn for a pretty thing like her. But little Adelaide Summers just shook her head, that stubborn chin jutting out. "I don't care if you're old," she'd declared. "I'll still love you." Her family was just passing through, a brief stop that somehow carved itself into my soul. 3 days. 3 days of her laughter echoing in the yard. 3 days where I felt something other than the cold emptiness I'd grown used to. When their wagon disappeared over the horizon, she'd whispered the promise one last time. For 20 years, that whisper was a ghost I couldn't shake. A sweet ache that never quite went away. "You're thinking loud again," Jeremiah said, pulling me from the memory. He gave me a knowing look. "The dangerous kind or the harmless kind?" "The kind that doesn't bear thinking about," I said, draining my cup. But Jeremiah wasn't letting it go. He put a hand on my shoulder, his voice serious. "Travis, a man who's lived as good a life as you deserves whatever happiness he can find. Don't go convincing yourself otherwise." I looked at him, confused. "You trying to tell me something?" "Just that sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, pushing himself off the railing. "And a smart man keeps his heart open to possibilities, even when those possibilities come riding in on a cloud of dust." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, walking back to the main house. I was left alone with his strange words and a feeling in my gut that this day was going to be different. A feeling I hadn't had in a very, very long time. As I headed out to the north pasture, I saw it. A single dust cloud on the eastern road. A lone rider. Coming straight for the ranch. I spent the morning mending fence, the familiar work usually enough to clear my head. But not today. Jeremiah's words, and that dust cloud, they churned in my mind. The rider moved at a steady pace, someone who knew horses, someone comfortable in the saddle. Not a drifter, not a salesman, someone with a purpose. By the time I turned my wagon for home, The sun was high and the rider was close. Close enough for my heart to hammer against my ribs. It was a woman, young, maybe mid-20s, sitting her chestnut mare with a grace that took my breath away. Her hair was pinned back under a worn hat, and even from a distance, something about the way she held her head. It was familiar. Terribly, impossibly familiar. I slowed the wagon, my hands gripping the reins. I needed to see her face. I needed to know. As she drew closer, the world started to tilt. The sun caught her eyes. They were blue. Summer sky blue. The kind of blue I hadn't seen in 20 years except in my dreams. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. It was madness. But as she reined in her horse 50 yards away, I knew. The stubborn set of her chin. The slight tilt of her head. The ghost of a 6-year-old girl staring back at me from a woman's face. Adelaide, I whispered, the name a prayer and a curse on my lips. She dismounted with a fluid grace, her gaze locked on mine. The pigtails were gone, replaced by thick dark hair. The round cheeks had given way to elegant angles. But the eyes? Those eyes were exactly the same, filled with an unwavering certainty that sent a shiver down my spine. "Hello, Travis," she said. Her voice was deeper, richer, but the warmth was the same. The warmth that had haunted my loneliest nights. "I told you I'd be back." I climbed down from the wagon, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. My mind was a storm, 20 years of quiet solitude shattered in a single moment. "Adelaide Summers," I managed, my voice a rough croak. "Lord have mercy." She smiled, that same brilliant smile that had lit up this ranch 2 decades ago. "It's Adelaide Hartwell now, actually," she said, and then her smile faltered just a bit. "Was, anyway. I'm a widow, Travis. Have been for 3 years." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This vibrant young woman, already a widow. It felt wrong, unfair. I'm sorry for your troubles," I stammered. "Thank you," she said, stepping closer. Close enough that I could see the fine lines around her eyes, lines that spoke of a life lived, of laughter and of tears. But I didn't come here to talk about the past. I came to keep a promise. Before I could process that, she reached into her saddlebag. She pulled out a small velvet pouch. My heart stopped. With steady fingers, she opened it and revealed a simple silver ring, its surface worn smooth. My breath hitched. "I bought this with the first money I ever earned," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I was 14. The jeweler thought I was buying it for my mother, but I told him the truth. I was buying it for the man I was going to marry." She pressed the ring into my calloused palm and closed my fingers around it. The metal was warm from her touch. Solid. Real. "I told you I'd marry you when I grew up," she said, her blue eyes boring into mine. "Well, I'm grown up now." The world spun. This couldn't be happening. "Adelaide," I choked out. "You were 6 years old. Kids say all sorts of things." "I meant it then, and I mean it now," she said, her voice unwavering. "I know how this sounds, Travis. I know what people will think. But I've loved you my whole life. I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make other folks comfortable." I looked from the ring in my hand to her determined face. This was madness. Utter madness. "I'm old enough to be your father," I said, my voice desperate. "Older than your father was when you left here." "I don't care about that," she said, stepping even closer. So close I could feel the heat radiating from her. "Do you remember what you told me? The last time I made my promise?" My mind supplied the words, sharp as glass. I told her I'd be too old for such foolishness. "And I said I didn't care if you were old," she whispered, her smile soft and patient. "I said I'd still love you just the same." 20 years haven't changed my mind, Travis. Have they changed yours? The question hung there, a challenge I didn't know how to answer. I looked up and saw half the ranch hands watching from a distance, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. "This is insane," I muttered. "Maybe it is," Adelaide said, reaching up to gently touch my cheek. Her fingers were cool against my weathered skin. "But it's the kind of madness that brought me home." "Home?" The word settled over me, warm and terrifying. I closed my eyes, feeling the carefully built walls of my solitude cracking, crumbling. "I can't ask you to do this," I said finally. "I'm not the kind of man who knows how to make a woman happy." "You're not asking, I'm offering," she said, stepping back, giving me space but not releasing me from her gaze. "I know you don't understand. How could you? But in 20 years no one has ever made me feel as safe, as seen, as you did in those 3 days." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I married a good man, Travis. Robert was kind, but he never saw me. Not the real me. No one has. Not like you did. Adelaide," my voice was a broken whisper, "I'm not asking you to love me back," she said, taking another step away. "Not right away. I'm just asking you to let me try. Let me stay. Let me show you that some promises are worth keeping." With that, she swung back onto her horse. "I'll be at the boarding house in town. The ring is yours. Keep it or give it back. But either way, I'm not leaving until you give me an answer." She tipped her hat, a perfect cowboy gesture, and rode toward town, leaving me standing in the dust with a silver ring burning a hole in my palm and my heart doing a rhythm I thought it had long forgotten. From the porch, I heard Jeremiah's low chuckle. "Well now," he said, "I'd say that's a possibility worth keeping your heart open for." I spent that night staring at the ceiling, the silver ring on my nightstand winking at me in the moonlight. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind, usually as quiet as the prairie at midnight, was a stampede of thoughts and feelings I'd buried for 2 decades. By dawn, I was up and dressed, the familiar routine of the ranch feeling alien, like I was walking through someone else's life. When I met Jeremiah in the yard, he just looked at me and grunted. "You look like hell." He handed me a cup of coffee. "You knew she was coming," I said. It wasn't a question. "Got a letter 3 weeks ago," he admitted. "Asked if you were still here. Still single." "And you didn't think to mention it?" "Would you have believed me?" he asked, a ghost of a smile on his lips. He was right. I wouldn't have. "She took a room at Martha Kelling's place," he added, "for 2 weeks, though I suspect she'll stay longer if you give her a reason." Just the thought of her a few miles away made my chest ache. What was I supposed to do? I pulled the ring from my pocket. It felt heavy with the weight of her conviction. "She's half my age, Jeremiah, twice as good as I deserve. What kind of man would I be to take advantage of some childhood fantasy?" "What kind of man would you be to throw away the honest feelings of a grown woman who rode across the country for you?" he countered. "That girl ain't playing games, Travis. She came here because she loves you." "She loves the memory of me," I argued. "Maybe," Jeremiah said, his wise old eyes studying me. "Or maybe she sees something in you that you've forgotten how to see in yourself." Before I could answer, we heard hoofbeats. It was her. Riding into the yard as if she belonged there, dressed in a simple riding skirt, her hair in a practical braid that somehow looked more elegant than any city woman's fancy hairdo. "Morning," she called, her voice bright. "Hope you don't mind. I thought I could help out around here." My mouth went dry. "Adelaide, you don't have to do that." "I know," she said, interrupting gently as she dismounted. "I want to. I'm not some delicate flower, Travis. I know my way around a ranch." To prove her point, she began checking her mare's hooves with an expert touch, her movements confident and sure. This wasn't an act. She was the real deal. "My husband, Robert, had a small spread near Denver," she said, as if reading my mind. I learned to mend fence and doctor sick cattle right alongside the hired hands. Tell me about him, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I had to know. She straightened up, her expression softening with a bittersweet memory. He was a good man, 10 years older than me. Steady, kind. We had 3 good years before the fever took him. She paused, stroking her horse's neck. Then she looked me straight in the eye. He knew about you. A cold knot formed in my stomach. What do you mean? I told him everything, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I told him about the little girl who promised to marry a ranch hand in Wyoming. I told him I still carried that promise in my heart. He understood. She took a deep breath. He said if anything ever happened to him, he hoped I'd have the courage to follow my heart. The confession hit me harder than any physical blow. I'd been ready for guilt, for the shadow of a dead husband standing between us. I wasn't ready for his blessing. From the porch, Jeremiah spoke, his voice quiet. Sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Adelaide said, a soft smile on her lips. He would have liked you both. Robert always said you measure a man by how he treats those who can't do anything for him. The way you treated a lonely little girl 20 years ago told me everything I needed to know. She then pulled a faded photograph from her pocket. It was the ranch yard, just as it was now, and in the background, unmistakable, was me. Younger, less worn, working with a horse. My father took this on our last day here, she said. I've carried it for 20 years. It's been my anchor. I stared at the image of the man I used to be, and I felt the last of my defenses crumble. You really mean this, I whispered. Every word, she said, stepping close. I'm 26 years old, Travis. I've spent 3 years in mourning and 3 years as a wife to a man I respected but never truly loved the way a woman should love her husband. I'm done living my life by other people's rules. My heart has belonged to you since I was 6 years old, and I'm not leaving until it's home. Over the next week, Adelaide became a part of the ranch. She didn't just help, she worked. She mended fences, helped with the branding, and earned the respect of every hand on the Broken Arrow. But it was the little things she did for me that unraveled me. A mended tear in my shirt left on my bunk. A thermos of coffee, just the way I liked it, waiting for me at sunrise. She was paying attention, seeing me in a way no one ever had. One evening, Jeremiah caught me watching her gentle a spooked colt. You're different when she's around, he said. More like the man I always knew was in there. He was right. A part of me I thought was long dead was coming back to life, and it was thrilling and terrifying all at once. The town was a different story. The whispers followed us whenever we rode in for supplies. I saw the looks. An old, broken-down ranch hand and a beautiful young widow. They didn't see a promise. They saw a scandal. The town preacher, a man I'd known for years, stopped me outside the general store. Travis, he said, his face a mask of concern. People are talking. A woman in her grief is vulnerable. You need to be careful you aren't taking advantage. The words were a knife in my gut, twisting the very doubts I had about myself. Was he right? Was I just a selfish old fool clinging to a fantasy? I started to pull back, to put distance between us. For her sake. But Adelaide wouldn't have it. She saw the change in me and confronted me head on. What is it? She demanded. What have they said to you? When I told her, her eyes flashed with a fire that startled me. Do you believe them? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Do you think I'm some weak, foolish girl who doesn't know her own mind? Before I could answer, she did something I never expected. The next Sunday, she walked into that church, stood up in the middle of the service, and told everyone her story. She told them about the promise, about the ring, about the 20 years she'd waited. She told them about her late husband's blessing. She looked every single one of them in the eye and said, Travis McKenna is the most honorable man I have ever known, and I will not have his character questioned, or my own. I came here to claim my future, and with God as my witness, that is what I intend to do." You could have heard a pin drop. Then, old Martha Kelling stood up. "Well, it's about time someone in this town remembered what courage looks like," she declared. And just like that, the tide turned. The whispers didn't stop, but now they were mixed with murmurs of respect. Adelaide had fought for us. For me. A few days later, she brought me something else she'd carried for 20 years. A small wooden horse, worn smooth with time. The one I'd carved for her. For Adelaide, I'd etched into the base, who will grow up to be someone special. My own words, coming back to haunt me. "What do you dream about, Travis?" she asked me that night, her hand covering mine as I held the little horse. For the first time, I was completely honest. "I dream about having someone to come home to," I said, my voice thick. "Someone who sees past the mistakes and the wasted years. Someone who thinks I'm worth loving." "That's not a dream, Travis," she whispered, her fingers tightening around mine. "That's what I'm offering you." It was then that I saw it. This wasn't a childhood fantasy. This was a woman's love, forged in time and loss and unwavering hope. And in that moment, I knew I was lost. Or maybe, for the first time, I was found. I looked into her summer sky eyes and felt something inside me finally let go. I was scared, terrified. But she was right. Some promises were meant to be kept. But our newfound peace was fragile. As the second week of her stay began, I started to believe this could actually work. We fell into a rhythm, working side by side during the day, sharing quiet dinners in the evenings. It was during one of those quiet moments that she brought out a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. "I started writing these a few months after we left," she said, her voice soft. "I never sent them. I guess I was afraid, but I wanted you to have them. I wanted you to know this wasn't just something I remembered. It was something I lived with. Every day." That night, alone in my room, I read them. 20 years of her life, poured onto paper, all of it addressed to me. I saw her grow from a little girl missing the ranch to a young woman navigating the world. I read about her school days, her first dance, her marriage to Robert. She wrote about him with respect and affection, but the undercurrent was always there, the promise. A letter from early in her marriage cut me to the core. "Robert is a good man," she wrote. "He knows about you. He says the heart is big enough for many kinds of love. I hope he's right, because mine feels like it's been split in two for as long as I can remember." The letters after his death were filled with grief, but also with a growing resolve. She was coming back. She was coming home. The last one, dated just 3 weeks before she arrived, laid her soul bare. "I know you'll think I'm a fool, but life is too short to ignore the deepest truths of your heart. And my truth has always, always been you." By the time I finished, dawn was breaking. I was surrounded by 20 years of her love, her hope, her unwavering faith. It wasn't an impulse. It was the most deliberate, patient love I had ever known. It humbled me, and it terrified me. When she arrived that morning, she found me on the porch, the letters spread out around me. "You read them," she said, her voice carefully neutral. I could only nod. It's a lot," she said quickly. "If it makes you uncomfortable—" "Uncomfortable!" I interrupted, standing up and taking her hands in mine. "Adelaide, it makes me feel like the luckiest man alive and the biggest fool in Wyoming. I've spent 2 decades convinced I was better off alone, while you were loving me through all of it." Her eyes filled with tears. "You missed me?" she whispered. "Every single day," I admitted, the truth finally breaking free. "I've loved you for 20 years, Adelaide. I just didn't have the courage to admit it, even to myself." Say that again, she breathed. I love you, I said, and the words felt like coming home. I love the little girl who made me a promise, and I love the woman who was brave enough to keep it. Her smile was like the sun breaking through the clouds. I love you too, Travis McKenna. I always have. I kissed her then, and it was a kiss that held 20 years of waiting, of loneliness, of unspoken hope. It was everything. The days that followed were a dream. Adelaide moved into a small, empty foreman's cabin on the ranch. We were learning each other again, not as a man and a child, but as two adults who had found their way back to each other against all odds. We were building a life. But the past wasn't done with me yet. One evening, as we walked by the creek, she took my hand, and her fingers traced the old, raised scars on my palms. They weren't from ranch work. They were from a different life, a life I'd tried to bury. Travis, she said gently. Tell me. My first instinct was to pull away, to shut down. But I looked into her eyes and knew I couldn't have secrets between us. Not anymore. The war, I said, my voice rough. I was with the Colorado Volunteers. I was good at it. Too good. I told her about the last battle, Gloretta Pass. We were ordered to take a Confederate position. Intelligence said it was lightly defended. It was a lie. It was a field hospital, filled with wounded boys, some no older than she was when I first met her. My orders, I said, my voice barely a whisper, were to take no prisoners. Adelaide's hand tightened on mine. I couldn't do it. I couldn't become that man. So I helped them, as many as I could. My own sergeant tried to stop me. That's where the scars came from. A bayonet fight with my own man, to protect the lives of my enemies. What happened? She asked, her eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own. They should have court-martialed me, executed me. But there were witnesses. The judge was a decent man. He knew war makes monsters of us all. I was discharged, honorably. But I never felt honorable. I spent 20 years wondering if I was a hero or a coward. You're neither, she said, her voice fierce. She lifted my scarred hands to her lips and kissed them. You're a man who chose compassion when it would have been easier to choose hate. These scars don't make you unworthy, Travis. They make you the man I've been waiting for. Her faith in me was a balm on a wound I didn't know was still open. For the first time, I started to believe her. I started to believe that maybe I wasn't a broken man after all. Maybe I was just a man who had been waiting for someone to see his scars and call them beautiful. We were happy. For a few perfect sun-drenched days, we were completely, utterly happy. And then the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday, delivered by a man in a crisp city suit who looked like he'd never seen a speck of dust in his life. Mr. Charles Hartwell, he introduced himself. Attorney at law. I represent the estate of your late husband, Mrs. Hartwell, or more specifically, the interests of his family. His eyes were cold, like a snake's. Adelaide tensed beside me as he handed her a thick, official-looking envelope. She broke the wax seal, her face growing paler with every line she read. When she looked up, her eyes were wide with a fear I'd never seen in them before. What is it? I asked, my own gut twisting into a knot. They're threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent, she whispered, the words barely audible. On what grounds? I growled, taking a step toward the lawyer. On the grounds that she has abandoned her proper mourning period to pursue an inappropriate relationship with a man of questionable character, the lawyer said, his gaze flicking over me with disdain. He wasn't finished. There is also the matter of her inheritance. The family believes a woman showing such poor judgment is not fit to manage the substantial assets left to her. The inheritance I refused? Adelaide shot back, her voice shaking with anger. Repeatedly. Refusing such a legacy could itself be seen as evidence of an unstable mind, the lawyer replied smoothly. The trap was laid. She was crazy if she took the money, crazy if she didn't. The family is prepared to be reasonable, he went on, ignoring me completely. If Mrs. Hartwell returns to Denver and submits to an evaluation by physicians of their choosing, they may reconsider. And if she refuses? I asked, my voice dangerously low. The lawyer's smile was pure poison. Then we will be forced to pursue all legal remedies, including a thorough investigation into the background of anyone who might be influencing her poor decisions. The threat was clear. They would dig into my past. They would find the war. They would twist it, use it, destroy me with it. And then he played his ace. In fact, the lawyer said, pulling another document from his satchel, we've already uncovered some disturbing information. He unfolded a paper that looked chillingly official. Military seals, signatures, the works. According to these records, a Sergeant Travis McKenna was court-martialed for cowardice and abandoning his post at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, dishonorably discharged after assaulting a superior officer. That's a lie, I said, but the blood had drained from my face. The document looked real, horrifyingly real. Is it? The lawyer purred. This paints a picture of a man who lost his nerve, a man who chose his own safety over his duty. Adelaide snatched the papers from his hand. I watched her face, searching for the unwavering faith I'd come to rely on. And for a split second, a single heart-stopping second, I saw it. Doubt. Just a flicker in her summer sky eyes. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a fierce denial. These are forgeries, she said flatly. I assure you, they are quite authentic, the lawyer replied, his tone dripping with false sympathy. I understand this must be a shock, Mrs. Hartwell. To discover the man you've trusted is not who he claims to be. Get off this land, I said, my voice a deadly whisper. The lawyer gave Adelaide one last pitying look. The family will not wait indefinitely for you to come to your senses, Mrs. Hartwell. He turned and walked away, leaving his poison to seep into the ground between us. The silence he left behind was deafening. The forged documents lay scattered at our feet. You don't believe them? Adelaide said, but it was a question, not a statement. I bent and picked up one of the papers. The forgery was perfect. Too perfect. Maybe they're right, Adelaide, I said, my voice hollow. Maybe you'd be better off without— Don't you dare, she snapped, her voice like a whip. Don't you let them win by making you doubt yourself. Look at these, I yelled, shaking the paper at her. They look real. If they can do this, they can do anything. She grabbed the papers from my hand and ripped them to shreds. I don't care what lies they've made up. I know who you are. Do you? I shot back, the old pain and self-loathing rising like bile. Because right now, I'm not so sure myself. What if they're not forged? What if my memory is wrong? What if I really was a coward? Then you're still the man I love, she said, her hands framing my face, forcing me to look at her. But the seed had been planted. Doubt was a weed, and it was taking root in the foundation of everything we'd built. They would destroy me to get to her. And in doing so, they would destroy her too. I looked at this brave, beautiful woman who had fought so hard for me, and I knew what I had to do. They'll ruin you if you stay with me, I said, my heart breaking with every word. It would be better. Better if you went back. Is that what you want? She asked, her voice steady but her eyes pleading. What I wanted didn't matter. Protecting her did. That night, as she slept in the little cabin, I made my choice. I packed my few belongings. I took the silver ring from my finger and placed it on the pillow where her head should have been. I left a short note. You deserve better. Find happiness, Adelaide. Just not with me. Then, under the cover of darkness, I rode away. I vanished into the mountains, a ghost once more, running from a past I could never seem to escape. When Adelaide woke, I was gone. The empty bunkhouse, the cold silver ring on my pillow, the cruel finality of my note, it was all designed to break her spirit, to send her running back to the safety of her old life. I had underestimated Adelaide Hartwell. She didn't run. She fought. She found Jeremiah in the kitchen, his face grim. "He's gone to protect you," the old man said, his voice rough with disappointment. "Thinks he's savin' you by breaking your heart." "Where did he go?" Adelaide asked, her voice not filled with tears, but with a cold, hard resolve. "North, toward the mountain spreads. Said he was looking for work." "Then I'm going after him," she declared. "But first, I'm going to prove they're liars." For 2 days, Adelaide became a woman possessed. She sent telegrams to Washington, wrote to veterans organizations, turning Copper Ridge into the headquarters of her own private war. The breakthrough came from Martha Kelling. Her late husband had also served with the Colorado Volunteers. His letters and military papers were stored in a trunk in her attic. "If your Travis was one of them boys," Martha said, leading Adelaide up the dusty stairs, "then there's no coward's blood in him. None at all." In that trunk, beneath yellowed letters and a moth-eaten uniform, Adelaide found it. Not a dismissal of the charges, not a simple letter of commendation. She found the truth, and it was more stunning than either of us could have imagined. It was an official citation, signed by Colonel John Chivington himself. It detailed the events at Glorieta Pass, praising the exceptional valor of one Sergeant Travis McKenna. It described how I had single-handedly rescued 15 wounded soldiers from a burning field hospital, suffering severe injuries in the process. But there was more. Folded carefully inside the citation was another document, one I had never known existed, because I had run before they could give it to me. The forged papers claimed I was court-martialed. The truth was, I had been awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest award for bravery a soldier could receive. Adelaide held the proof in her hands, her heart soaring. She didn't just have evidence, she had a weapon. That evening, she gathered the entire town in the main street. She stood on the porch of the general store, the real military documents clutched in her hand. "2 days ago," she called out, her voice ringing with power, "a man came here and told us that Travis McKenna was a coward. He used lies to try and drive us apart. He wanted me to doubt the character of the man I love." She held up the real commendation. "This is the truth. Travis McKenna is not a coward. He is a hero. He saved 15 lives, and for his bravery, he was awarded this nation's highest honor." A roar went up from the crowd. Indignation, pride. "Where is he?" someone shouted. "He left!" Adelaide cried, her voice finally breaking. "He believed the lies. He sacrificed his own happiness to protect me." "Well, that's the most foolish thing I ever heard," Martha Kelling declared from the crowd. "Which is why I need your help," Adelaide said, her strength returning. "I need to find him and bring him home. I need him to see this, to know the truth. But more than that, I need him to know that his community stands behind him." Old Jeremiah stepped forward to stand beside her. "Every man and woman here owes Travis a debt," he bellowed. "If you're willing to fight for him, Adelaide, then we'll fight right alongside you." The town erupted. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were an army of friends, riding out to rescue one of their own from the prison of his own past. The next morning, a posse unlike any the territory had ever seen rode out from Copper Ridge. It wasn't chasing an outlaw, it was chasing a hero. And at its head rode a woman with summer sky eyes, a 20-year-old promise in her heart, and the truth in her saddlebag. I'd found work at a remote cattle camp high in the mountains. The work was hard, the nights were cold, and the loneliness was a familiar blanket. It was how things were meant to be. 3 days after I arrived, I was mending a fence line when I saw them coming. A group of riders cresting the ridge. My heart sank. The lawyer. He'd found me. But then I saw the rider at the front. The worn hat, the chestnut mare, the determined set of her chin. Adelaide. My mind reeled. Joy, shock, fear, and a deep, aching resignation warred within me. She shouldn't be here. Adelaide, I said as she dismounted. You have to leave. Where else would I be? She said, walking right up to me, her eyes blazing. Did you really think I'd let you disappear without a fight? She didn't wait for an answer. She pulled the commendation from her saddlebag and shoved it into my hands. Those documents were lies, Travis. This is the truth. Read it. My hands trembled as I read the words. Hero, valor, Congressional Medal of Honor. Everything I had spent 20 years telling myself I wasn't. It was all there, in black and white. How? I whispered, my voice choked. I fought for you, she said simply, the way you would have fought for me. But the doubt, the deep, dark rot of it was still there. It doesn't matter, I said, shaking my head. Her family, they'll find another way to hurt you. Let them try, Adelaide said, stepping so close I could feel her righteous anger. Do you know what I did before I rode up here? I stood in the main street and told every person in Copper Ridge who you are. I showed them this. She tapped the metal citation. And then? I asked. Then, she said, a fierce smile spreading across her face. I took out my marriage certificate from my first wedding, and I burned it. Right there, in front of everyone. I'm done with the past, Travis. I'm done letting other people's expectations rule my life. I am Adelaide Summers, the girl who made you a promise. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver ring. This has been waiting for 20 years. I'm not letting lies and lawyers keep it waiting any longer. As she spoke, the rest of the riders crested the hill. It was half the town. Jeremiah, Martha Kelling, the blacksmith, the shopkeeper, their faces resolute. They had come for me. The townspeople? I stammered, overwhelmed. They said it was about time someone fought for Travis McKenna, Adelaide said, taking my scarred left hand in hers. They said they've known what kind of man you are for 20 years, and no piece of paper was going to change their minds. She slid the warm silver ring onto my finger. It settled into place as if it had always belonged there. You are the man I have loved since I was 6 years old, she said, her voice soft but strong. Now and forever. I pulled her into my arms, holding on like a drowning man, and felt 20 years of loneliness and shame wash away in the tide of her love. I had run from my own valor, and she had ridden into the mountains with an army of friends to give it back to me. As the delegation from Copper Ridge surrounded us, their faces beaming, Martha Kelling produced a telegram. This came through this morning, she said. From the War Department. Adelaide read it aloud. It was an official confirmation of my service record, my commendation, my medal. The lies had been utterly destroyed. Then Jeremiah added the final twist. That lawyer, he said, spitting on the ground. Turns out he wasn't even hired by the Hartwell family. The real family sent a man yesterday. Said they wish Adelaide nothing but happiness and have no interest in her inheritance. Someone else hired that snake. Someone who wanted to hurt you specifically. It didn't matter who. All that mattered was the circle of faces around me, the feel of Adelaide's hand in mine, the silver ring on my finger. They weren't just bringing me home. They were showing me I'd been home all along. Say you'll marry the girl! The blacksmith shouted, and the crowd roared its approval. I looked down at Adelaide, this impossible, incredible woman. Adelaide Summers, I said, my voice carrying across the mountain air. Will you marry me? Travis McKenna, she replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. I thought you'd never ask. Our wedding was 6 months later, in the little church in Copper Ridge. The whole town was there. As I watched Adelaide walk down the aisle, radiant in a simple white dress, I knew I was the richest man in Wyoming. We said our vows, the words of promise not just to each other, but to the future we had fought so hard to claim. The reception was a celebration of community, of a town that had become our family. Later that night, alone on the porch of our cabin, Adelaide leaned against me, watching the stars. "No regrets?" I asked. "Only that it took us 20 years to get here," she whispered. I pulled out my old leather journal. For the first time in 2 decades, I had something to write that wasn't about cattle or the weather. "Married Adelaide Summers today," I wrote. She kept her promise, and I finally learned I was worth keeping it for. I closed the book on the past and pulled my wife onto my lap. Home wasn't a place. It was this woman, this moment, this peace. Some promises, I'd learned, are so strong, they can cross any distance, heal any wound, and outlast any lie. And some love stories are worth waiting 20 years to live. If you enjoyed this story about a promise that refused to be broken, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories of hope, justice, and the incredible power of the human heart coming your way. And you won't want to miss a single one.